Welcome to another episode of Knowledge to Currency, where knowledge is power and currency is king. I'm your host, Senator Porter, and today we have Dr. Charles Liu on the show. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you. I've been waiting for this for a while. Been a big fan of the show. Have seen it since its inception.
Yeah.
And have been quietly waiting for you to ask me to be on it. So I'm glad that finally it's my time.
Well, the funniest thing about that is a lot of your friends, when you start something like this, you don't think that people will want to come on the show. So then you ask people, and no one said no to me yet. So thank God.
There you go.
But you don't know who has time to be on the show or whatnot. And now that we're 50 something episodes in,
Wow.
I feel that I built something where I can start to have guests like you on the show, which is awesome. So,
wow. Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for being on the show. So what I love about this show is we really focus on empowerment of having multiple streams of income. Don't, like they say online, quit your job and go be an entrepreneur. I think your job is your first investor, and it's really smart to have that income there. So if you have to verify income to get funding from the bank, you have that possibility. And one thing that I do like about in your professional opinion or how you do things is that you have always balanced that very well. So you currently have a W-2 income, and then you also have a rental portfolio. Obviously, you have investments. What was one of the reasons why you always kept a job while you were on your, real estate journey?
Yeah. So I know a lot of folks will say that, you like in order to go in, you have to go all in, right?
Right.
You have to quit your full-time job. They ask you like, how serious are you about this?
Right.
I think for me, I was always serious about real estate, but that really kind of got built up over time.
Mm-hmm.
That started off with a $100,000 condo in Austin, Texas,
Right.
roughly in about 2010. So, it was coming up
Right.
as a technopolis, as they say,
Right.
but it hadn't come up quite yet. Right.
Right.
But then during that time, I'd seen all these, now brand name types of, stores, things that people do, Top Golf, Alamo Draft House. I remember the very first kind of like, I think it was one of those dog parks where people could go drink, but then let their dogs play around, right?
Right.
And they had these bark rangers that would watch after the dogs while they like had lunch and had a drink and stuff. It was just things that I was into, frankly, right? And so I remember like all these different installations coming up in Austin, and I bought my first condo as a 1-1 in South Congress, which back in the day wasn't really built up quite yet.
Mm-hmm.
It had the potential. There was a bat colony that was nearby, nearby the bridge, and it was a great investment property. And so that's kind of how that came up. But I never quit my W-2 job, right? So I worked at universities. I've been a university administrator for about 2 decades now.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I worked really hard to be where I am today, right? Got a bachelor's, got a master's, got a doctorate. And just throughout that time, I think for me, after a certain amount of time, I had folks kind of reaching out to me to offer me positions or just through conversations. And so having a nice steady W-2 income, I think relieves a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And I like having my W-2 income. And honestly, I really love the jobs I've had.
Right.
So haven't felt a need to completely, take the plunge out of W-2 income altogether.
So just for the listeners, so you understand, so he basically says he enjoys his job, but he still wants to make additional income. So just by buying that one condo, how did that change for you? Like how big is your portfolio today? Like how many properties do you have?
Yeah, so we have, we started in single family,
Mm-hmm.
and then we moved over to multifamily. So we kind of played like the Monopoly game. We recently invested, with one of your guests as well,
Right.
In a hotel.
Right.
So we've literally just been playing the Monopoly game. We started in Texas, so only in Austin.
Okay.
Then we expanded to El Paso, the South Texas region in the Valley. and then to Arizona, to Oklahoma City is a big one that we're pretty bullish on.
Hmm.
And then Tampa, Florida, which, as you know, is
You
one of my
love
favorite
Tampa.
cities. Yeah, so a lot of times, so kind of tying into the W-2 income, um, because of my W-2 income job, I get to
Mhm.
travel a lot for work, right?
Right.
So whenever I go to conferences, I actually see which cities I think are like hella
Popping.
dope.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Right? And like where I see myself, like well, if I have a thought like I could live in this city after
Mm,
being here for 3 days just at a conference,
yeah.
then that's a city that I want to invest in.
Smart.
And what I'll say is that 9 out of 10 times, those end up being cities that end up being on these lists that everyone's kind of promoting in terms of where people want to move to. Right?
That's true.
So,
No, that's facts. So then, as far as like all these steps that you've taken, especially in the last 3 years, like from when we first met to now, you've done a tremendous amount in real estate in a short period of time. Um, so as far as like, what is your goals or what things do you want to do? Like now you get in a hotel, you trying to buy a skyscraper? Like what some of the ideas you have moving forward with that?
yeah, so I think in the long run, we want to go a little bit more into the commercial space.
Hmm.
We want to continue doing multifamily units. We've sold out of a lot of our single family units recently as we've transitioned more into multifams. So we want to hit the multifamily units a little bit harder. Honestly, we've really also been looking for other folks to be able to invest in larger, larger acquisitions, right? So
Okay, like
hotels, larger
syndications.
apartment complexes. You're right, syndications. So that's really where our goal is. I think also just from like a geographic perspective, as you may have noticed, we we invest primarily in red states, just to be very real. So right, Oklahoma, Florida, Texas, um, Arizona, and so I think for us, we're really looking at states and cities where we're on the kind of the early end of being able to get in before it gets to like in where Austin is right now, where it's already gotten really expensive, right? Like
Sure.
I loved Austin back in 2010 or even back in 2006.
Yeah.
So those are the types of markets that we're really interested in.
Yeah, even like Tampa, I was looking at rent. It's not as much as San Diego, but it's close.
Yeah.
It's $300-400 a month difference, but that's still a lot compared to when I lived in Tampa in 2015 and stuff. It was not as expensive as it is now, but it's a great city, and it's booming. And what's happening in San Diego, I think, is the same kind of thing that was happening in Tampa when I left and came here in 2017. Tampa just exploded,
Yeah.
and I think that's what's happening in San Diego now.
You know why, right? It's
Because
because I went to a conference there and I was like loving it, and then everyone followed suit. No, I'm just playing, but but for real, like the conference travel, like going out to explore different cities, also seeing like where conferences take place, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that actually has a lot to do with it.
for sure.
And so I remember, yeah, going to. In fact, I moved to San Diego largely because I came to a conference here.
Really?
I remember coming to San Diego. I was here for a conference. We stayed at the Marriott downtown. I remember seeing people running along the bay.
Yeah.
And in my head, I said, I'm going to be moving out there within the next 3 to 5 years.
All right.
And then
So
3
you
years
made
later, yeah,
a,
lo and behold, here I was.
well, affirmation.
That's right. Yeah, you gotta dream it to live it.
Yeah, we met at a conference, so you're right about that. Like
right.
when I moved here, one of the first things I saw was Comic Con. So
Yep.
I moved here, and Comic Con was like the next week. So I'm walking around the harbor like you're talking about. And I'm seeing all this. I never seen it before. Didn't know anything about it. But then I started to learn that the National Association of Realtors, they have a conference here, San Francisco, Chicago, Boston, New Orleans, and Orlando.
Yep.
And that conference travels and it changes every year. So yeah, usually if there's a big convention center, I mean, people want people to come there for a reason, and people pick because one of the people that is part when I work for Wells Fargo, when she's a part of the person that sets everything up for the conferences.
Right.
So when people are deciding on going to a place, they want to pick someplace fun and vibrant. So it does make sense when you say that. That the conferences usually are in good cities.
100%.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Now, as far as when we think about like that one house you paid 100,000 for, when you sold it, how much did you actually clear?
We doubled. Yeah. So
So
we ended up selling for
200,000.
250.
Wow.
Roughly about 2 to 3 years later.
And then did you roll that into a single family, or what did you do differently?
We did. So then we went from a condo, actually into a townhome still in
Okay.
Austin.
Yeah.
So now that I'm thinking about it, like we literally played the Monopoly game.
Yeah.
Where we went from like a one, it was a 1-1, maybe about a 500 square foot condo right in South Congress in Austin, to roughly about a 900 square foot 2-1 townhome
Mm-hmm.
in Austin as well. And then later on, we rolled that into a single family.
And that's the power of real estate as well. Like, people don't realize all you did was live in the house. You didn't flip it like these shows or nothing. You just say, I'm going to buy this, I'm going to live here. Either I'm going to pay a mortgage or I'm going to pay a rent. So what I try to tell people too is, like, if you can afford to make the payment, buy something, because eventually it's going to give you a return. You're going to have to pay rent regardless, even if it's a little more than renting, and you're going to be here for, 3 or 4 years.
Yep.
It makes sense to buy. Then when you sell it, you actually get some of your money back.
Yep. And that time I was actually in graduate school. Right?
Okay.
So I was in Austin because I went to the University of Texas at Austin doing my doctorate program. And so I wasn't making a lot of money.
Right.
But then where I did make money was I had a summer job that paid me about 10 grand for roughly about 7 to 8 weeks of work.
Okay.
And so, I wasn't making a lot of money during the school year because I was in school and I was doing my thing.
Right.
And then during the summers is when I kind of had multiple jobs and was working
Trying to hustle.
different things. Yeah. So I hustled a lot during the summer. My program was usually people take about 4 years to finish my program. I hustled, I got it done in 3,
Okay.
just because, to be honest, as a poor graduate student, I was like, this sucks. And I think during that time I realized, I was looking around me and people didn't really know a lot about finances.
Yeah.
People didn't really know about retirement. People didn't really know a lot about saving. Folks didn't really have budgets.
And these are educated people with
These
degrees.
are extremely
Right.
educated people, right?
Right.
Like, these are people from an education perspective, from an academic degree, paper degree type of perspective. They're at the
Mhm.
top of the game.
Right.
But a lot of them didn't think through their finances, or a lot of times when I saw it, it was interesting because like they didn't even really care
Right.
that much. And so I remember looking around and I remember thinking through it and having that experience, just not having money and being like, this sucks. Like, I don't want to be a poor graduate student forever, right? So during that time, and I finished my degree, but I
Yeah.
accelerated my time, and I sat down with 2 of my mentors and colleagues who essentially taught me how to get that done within 3 years.
Okay.
So I did my 3 years, I got my degree, and I got out of there.
So then, saying that, like, you're just like, hey, I'm going to school. I'm doing everything that they tell you to do.
Yep.
What were some tools, or what are some mentors or some things you read to get you out of that mindset to say, hey, here's my plan on making more money?
Yeah. So I remember I had a mentor of mine who, so he was a great guy. And so my first job out of grad school was a postdoctorate, but I had a director title, right? So
Okay.
it was one of those things where I had like a pretty fancy title,
Yeah.
but I was making about $60,000 a year off the gate.
Right.
And the following year, I got a job offer that essentially almost doubled what I was making then. But where I was supposed to be at with that postdoc, people usually stay in those positions for 2-3 years.
Okay.
So I remember when I came back to him and I said, hey, look, I have this offer. We were about to take a trip to study abroad in Beijing, China. It was the first trip of its kind.
Okay.
We took an inaugural group of students, mainly Black and brown students abroad.
Okay.
And I was the only person who spoke Mandarin.
Oh, nice.
So I remember I came to him with this job offer 2 months before we left on that trip. And he said, Charles, there's no way that I can lose you right now. Like, what can I do to keep you? And so I handed him my job offer. And
Oh, nice.
from there, he matched it. He gave me about $10,000 to $15,000 of professional development funds, which is how I got to travel to conferences to see different cities.
Sure.
But what he said, and I'll never forget this, was, Charles, I was really hoping to keep you here for those 3 years at that salary level,
Right.
because that would have been in my best interest.
Right.
But congratulations to you for going out there, being on the market, and coming back to me and essentially forcing me to give you more money.
what you're worth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I've never forgotten that, because it was a mentor of mine that I thought was in my corner.
Sure.
And in a lot of ways he was in my corner. Right?
Sure.
So I'm not negating that at all.
Yeah.
But even he, in his role as my supervisor, he was trying to keep me at my salary range for as long as possible, because
Right.
that was what was the most beneficial
For the overall picture of
exactly.
the school. And that,
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
that's actually, you dropped a lot of jewels right there. So number one, always know your worth. So if you're working at a company, no matter what it is, they're paying you a salary, but that means you're very important to pay you whatever salary. Take that knowledge and see if other people will pay you more for what you're learning or what you can do. Two, go back to that company and say, hey, here's what I'm seeing my market value is. I'd like to stay here, but if you can't pay me what I can get out elsewhere, I'm gonna have to go, and then force them to do it. And I mean, you can't blame a business for trying to keep costs down, because
Right.
that's how they keep going. But at the same time, don't be underpaid when you should get more. So that's a lot of information you gave right there.
100%. And I think
Yeah.
I think the timing is really important too, right?
Mhm.
So one of my mentors once told me, you gotta strike when it's hot.
Yeah.
And so in that scenario in particular, I was kind of purposefully waiting for the right time to make that ask.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, I asked 2 months before we were about to leave on that trip, where I knew I was the only Mandarin speaker. Like, how are you going to take 60 kids abroad that don't speak any Mandarin
Yeah.
with no Mandarin speakers?
Yeah,
Right?
that's true.
So I think also just the power of language, the power of knowing, like you said, your value and your worth in the context of the time
Mm-hmm.
is extremely important.
And you care, like you said, there's people you work with that are educated and stuff, and they're like, they don't care. And a lot of people are that way. They don't care about their finances. They just kind of go through the motions. And if you want more, you got to educate yourself. You got to continue to get more skills to do more things. And
Yep.
you'll see, and mindset too. Mindset is very important with that. So so recently you purchased a new house, right?
I did. Yes.
Okay. So with the way the market is with interest rates and whatnot, what was the strategy used to do that?
Yeah. So for the purposes of this house, and there were multiple offers on the home,
Mm-hmm.
and we're in San Diego. And It's
Yeah.
very competitive. I think this home altogether had about 4 offers before we arrived at the table. So essentially, we had to make the offer extremely competitive. People were already bidding over asking price.
Right.
And so for me, I think one of the questions was, how badly do we want this house? And so when I spoke with my spouse, we were like, yeah, we really want to have this house, right?
Right.
And so from there, we ended up taking out our margin. So we borrowed against ourselves and our own investments to be able to offer up a cash offer.
Mm-hmm.
At that point in time, no other type of offer would have made the deal sweet enough for the sellers to sell to us.
Right.
So we couldn't be on contingency like we had been in the past. We couldn't be on any sort of loan, to be frank. And so we had to borrow against ourselves and offer a cash offer in order to be as competitive as possible for that particular deal. Now, the way that I'm thinking about it, and again, like, I'm not necessarily a financial expert, and I'm not an expert in mortgages or anything like that, but
Right.
we're already at a time where interest rates are high.
Right.
And so from now on, at least from everyone that I've talked to, we can really only go down from here. And I know that the Feds just paused that and
Right.
said that we're not at any time soon. But in reviewing our finances, we're able to hold it for a good amount of time assuming that it will
Eventually drop.
eventually drop, and
Yep.
then we can do a refi later on down the road.
Yeah, and for people that may not be educated, if you have 401k or you have any type of retirement accounts, you can leverage money against those accounts to make purchases in real estate, or instead of paying the banks higher interest rate, you can end up paying yourself. And then what you can also do once you actually get the asset, you can then refinance and take that money back to pay off the loan,
That's
which
right.
I believe that's what you plan on doing.
Yes, that's correct. And this was the first time that we had ever
Done
done
it before,
anything like that, right?
right?
And I remember, just to be honest with you, like, so from a financial perspective, I'm actually quite conservative in a lot of ways.
Sure.
Like, in the sense that, like, I grew up with parents, I grew up in an immigrant household, with parents that didn't really speak English, that never took out a loan, that saved until they could buy stuff in cash,
Sure.
right? So my perspective has really shifted a lot since I started learning more about loans and how to
Sure.
leverage in that way. I think my brother and I, being folks that were, that have grown up in America,
Yeah.
have a very different perspective than our immigrant parents in that regard. And so I remember taking out my first loan, and taking out my first mortgage, and freaking out because my parents always taught me to never owe anyone money.
Okay.
And I know that that goes for a lot of folks that grow up in immigrant families, right?
Yeah.
Like, when I talk to my colleagues that come from immigrant families, we're all taught in this very deliberate way of, like, never owing money to anyone,
Yeah.
especially banks, because they will
They'll get you.
They will get you. And so, since learning a little bit more about debt and learning that debt can actually be a good thing, right?
Oh yeah.
My mind has really shifted on that. And so, had you talked to me 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there's no way I would have ever done this deal.
Right.
I would have just said, I can't afford this. There's no way that I can get this home, and we'll just move on to the next one.
Yeah.
And since then, right, like, obviously things have worked out.
Well, think about it. Since I met you, you had the house in PB. You sold that house, bought the house that you currently have, and gained so much equity in less than 2 years.
Yeah.
And then now you're downsizing that house to this house, and like your payment never went up in all that time. Just with also, I mean, you can't put it into words how powerful that is. Where when people think about it, if someone's buying a house that's not a multi-million-dollar house, they put down 3.5% into this entity, just make their payments. They don't even got to fix it up or nothing. Just make your payments.
Yep.
And in the San Diego market, like, it's gone up over 20% in the last, like, 4 years.
Yep.
I think it's like over 26%, something like that. So, I mean, or like the house you had in Texas where it doubled the
Yep.
value. Like, I mean, you could buy certain things, but it seems like real estate is like pretty safe.
In California, appreciation is a play, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I mean, every time that we have gone to put our house on the market, I've been pleasantly surprised in speaking with our realtor about where, what price point we can even sell for.
Sure.
And so, if you don't mind moving, which is a hassle,
Yeah.
and if you don't mind, having that lifestyle disruption, then that's one way where we've been able to play off of the appreciation play. And the thing that's, wild is that, like you said, we've kind of quote unquote downsized, right?
Yeah.
Or we've bought cheaper houses for every time that we've moved. Even though the homes itself have not necessarily gotten smaller,
Yeah.
although we have moved about 1 mile away from the ocean for every move
Yeah.
that we've done.
That's
Yeah,
true. Yeah, you were not even a mile from the ocean
That's right.
to like.
Like 1.5 miles from the ocean. And
Yeah.
then now we're about another mile east. Yeah. So
But it's all been good. It's all been like bigger houses. Would you say this house is same size as the first house?
this house is larger than the first house,
Okay.
but smaller than the second house.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in 2 years, you're gonna sell this one and get another one.
I don't know about that. We'll have to see where we are with, the thing is that as you get older, right, like your priorities change.
Hmm.
And so I remember when I first moved to San Diego, I was like, I think early 30s, I was like, yeah, I'm going to live right by the ocean.
Hmm.
That's why I moved to San Diego. Lived in PB, had a great experience there, love that community.
Hmm.
But as I've gotten older, right, like just priorities shift. And so
Sure.
moving away from the ocean, like a mile, 2 miles wasn't a big deal for me.
Right.
And then I think for me now, I'm looking more at like, do I have easy access to a freeway?
Right.
Knowing the traffic patterns now, can I get from point A to point B in a pretty easy way?
Yeah.
Am I living in a house that's comfortable for me and for my family and for my dogs?
Hmm.
Of course, the dogs thing is extremely important because, you got to prioritize your dogs.
Absolutely. That's why you're getting the turfs installed.
Exactly.
What was I gonna say? I lost my train of thought. Hold on. Oh, so then you also are doing speaking now. That's another way to make money. So let's talk about that. How'd you become a public speaker?
Yeah. So the funny thing is that, and again, I'm just gonna be brutally honest here. So I never saw myself as a speaker.
Okay.
I actually tell this story when I was young, and when I was a kid. My parents told me that I used to cry anytime someone approached me.
Really?
Um,
Okay.
Granted, one of them was a clown, and I'm still deathly scared of clowns. but yeah, like they actually for a while thought about whether moving to America was the right move
Okay.
because I was so scared of talking to people.
Okay.
And so growing up, I was an extremely shy kid. I didn't really speak to people. I kind of kept to myself. And it wasn't until high school where I kind of, grew out of my shell a little bit more. But I say all of this to say that speaking to me did not come naturally for a very long time.
Okay.
It wasn't until I graduated from college. I joined this corps called Teach for America.
Okay.
Ended up teaching day in, day out, super judgy, but really awesome. 7th and 8th graders, 12 and 13-year-olds, day in, day out, where I became a little bit more comfortable with public speaking.
Oh, so that's another thing too. Because you were a teacher, is it easier to speak in front of an audience? Because kind of when you're teaching, you're doing it every day, right?
Yeah. So I remember during my lesson or during my training, you had to give a sample lesson, right?
Okay.
So they paired 3 of us together, and together we were supposed to deliver a 15-minute lesson,
Okay.
which meant that if you divide it in even by 3, each of you is supposed to
Do
get up and
5
talk for
minutes.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yo, I was so nervous that I finished my section in 2 minutes.
Oh wow. You're like, all right, I'm done. Sit down.
I got up there, I said whatever I said. Honestly, I kind of blacked out just because I was so scared of speaking in front of people.
Right.
And then my partner teachers luckily kind of swooped in and helped me out.
Okay.
But that was my very first lesson that I ever gave, right? So whenever I talk to folks that are, kind of scared of speaking in public, or folks who want to go into teaching that don't know if they have the chops for it,
Yeah.
I always like to talk about, frankly, like my failures and like where
Right.
I learned, because that's where I came from. And it wasn't something that was very natural for me.
Okay.
As far as, learning to speak publicly and getting asked to do that, I actually gave a talk that was for free, right? So I didn't get paid for it at a university, at Johns Hopkins University where I was working at. And one of the members in the audience, I posted on LinkedIn, one of the members in the audience had seen my talk and worked as their head HR for their global unit for a
Okay.
company called Media Arts Lab. And then from then on, he actually asked me to speak and give a series, a 3-part talk about the challenges and barriers and opportunities that Asian Americans have working in the U.S., right, from a professional perspective.
Okay.
And so that was my very first kind of paid speaking gig, if you will.
Yeah.
That was virtual. Posted about that on LinkedIn. Here's the power of LinkedIn. And then from then on, I've had other folks approach me about speaking, and it's just honestly snowballed.
Nice.
So one of the subsequent gigs was a new conference that was happening that was called the National Association for Diversity Officers in K-12 Education.
Mm-hmm.
So it was folks that worked in diversity, equity, inclusion work within the K-12 sector. So a lot of superintendents, a lot of high school principals, a lot of coaches, a lot of folks from districts. So I spoke at that event. And then also there were members in the audience there that followed up with us and then wanted to see if we wanted to speak for their specific schools or their specific districts. And so that's how it happened for me. To be honest, it wasn't something that I necessarily sought out. I did it for free as part of my job at a university. And then it just kind of snowballed while I talked about what I was talking about on LinkedIn.
And so just imagine, what if you start getting paid so much for that, it's more than your W-2 income? Because a lot of people don't realize that's the most speakers make. Like my friend had an event and Gary Vee spoke at his event.
Right.
You had to pay him like $230,000.
Yep.
And you're just like, what? He didn't speak for an hour, but I mean, it was a good speech. So imagine if he knocks a couple of those out, he's making $1 million just going to speaking.
Yeah, you can totally bank on it. You know, working at a university, we oftentimes got pretty high profile speakers to come and speak, right? So I remember, and you and I talked about this, but we got Trevor Noah to come and speak for roughly about 30 minutes, and it was completely virtual. And we paid him a few $100,000 for that talk. And granted, it's Trevor Noah, right? So I completely understand.
30 minutes, he making more than NFL players.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, you know, so I definitely see the value of speaking. I also think, and whenever I mentor students, and just folks kind of, you know, wherever they are in their path, I think the ability to be able to speak, whether it be one-on-one or in small group settings, or in a room full of 500, 1,000 people, that ability to be able to speak publicly, whether you want to monetize it or not, is extremely important just to be able to get your ideas across.
I totally agree with that. So we got teaching, we got real estate, speaking. Let's talk about Ivory Bridges.
Yeah, which you're on the board. You're on the board now. Thank you very much for
connected. I'm honored to be upon the board. So what made you, I guess, set this up, and why do you feel it's important?
Yeah, thank you. So I highly identify, and, you know, I had already talked about this, as, you know, the son of an immigrant family, of, you know, the son of a family that came to the country without speaking a lot of English. And both my brother and I are proud first-generation college graduates. And that was and continues to be a part of my identity in whatever I do.
Right.
I remember growing up, I always knew that I wanted to go to college. I followed in the steps of my big brother, David, who went off to University of Illinois and then later on University of Maryland. I was a year behind him, but I remember when I got accepted to the University of Texas at Austin, and I remember getting my packing list for, like, you know, moving in. I literally had no idea what I was doing. And David happened to be back from break at that time, and he was like, look, little bro, right? like I gotcha, right? Like, and he literally helped me, like, buy stuff. We made a Target run together. We bought stuff. He helped me pack. But I remember every single, it was just so hard, right? Just not having had that experience, not necessarily having parents that had that experience to be able to mentor me and walk me through that, like they had been able to do for pretty much every other aspect of my life.
Right.
To not being able to know which classes to choose, what time, like what time do I even go to class, right?
Right.
Where do I show up? It was a lot of the things that I could see where other students who had parents or siblings or, you know, other folks within their network, they had grown up with that and they knew exactly what to do. I was completely lost.
Right.
And the cool thing is that I knew I wasn't the only one that
Feeling
felt
that way.
Yeah. Right? I actually tell this story. So when I first got to the University of Texas, when I first got to Austin, I flew in by myself because my parents couldn't take off work.
Okay.
And so from the airport to the university, they had this shuttle. So I had to take the bus. And I remember They didn't tell you exactly where to get off. It's summer in Texas, in Austin,
Hot.
in August.
Hot.
If you've ever been there before, it is blazing hot during that time. Like August in particular is the worst, right?
And you had all your bags too?
Yes, I had.
Oh man.
So I had to get that August time slot again because I was first gen. I didn't know what orientation was. I didn't even sign up for orientation. And I remember they sent me a piece of mail that was like, we are about to revoke your admission to the university if you do not come to university orientation. Which now, like, I'm on the other side of things. Like, I get, right? Like,
Right.
like now that I've worked for a university, I understand where they're coming from.
Right.
But as a first gen college student, like, I didn't know we had to do an orientation.
Right.
And I'm sure they emailed me, but you know, like I'm 17, right? So
Yeah, definitely not worried about that.
yeah. So I got to orientation, you know, got off at the wrong bus stop. I got there, you know, I got off about 2 stops early, had to walk roughly about a mile and a half with my suitcases
in 100 degrees.
in 100-degree heat. And when I got there, luckily my mentor was this guy named Kyle. Still remember his name to this date, 20 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw me and he saw what a train wreck I was. Like I'm like sweating, I'm pissed off. I'm like, why the heck did I decide to come to college? Like this was the worst mistake of my life. Took me aside, literally gave me a shirt from his own like you know, from his own
or whatever
wardrobe or whatever. It was a cool new UT shirt. I changed, and I remember the power that I realized what mentorship can do for you.
Yeah.
I went from completely hating my life to getting a new shirt
Right.
and being introduced to a new group of friends
Right.
that have been great friends, you know, over the course of the past, 2 to 3 decades since I've been out of college. And I think that was the type of environment that I wanted to create for other first gen
Like
college
students, right?
And so, as you know, because you're on the board, we offer financial assistance in the form of an unrestricted scholarship,
Mm-hmm.
which is big because a lot of times what they'll do is they'll apply that money directly to a student's tuition.
Mm-hmm.
But what they don't know is that it ends up affecting their financial aid on the back end.
Right.
So having worked in universities, I wanted to make sure that we gave unrestricted aid to students. And then on top of that, they get a series of coaches to help them in their journey. So we have a wellness coach that helps them with everything related to their health, their mental health, their spirituality, sleep, literally anything that they want from a wellness perspective. A financial coach, which, because as we've already talked about, finances are extremely important.
Yep.
And no one talks about it in college. Like no one ever talks about it in college or in high school.
Or in high
K-12.
school, or like you said, period. No one wants to talk about
Exactly.
it.
So having a financial coach that upfront helps you out with your finances, gets you to understand about your own finances from a very personal, individualized level. And then the last part, of course, is a career coach. So someone that helps assess your strengths, helps you think through your resume, your cover letter, your interview process, salary negotiations. Again, things that a career center might be able to offer, but rather than scaling it at thousands of students at one time, we're doing it at a very individualized, personal level.
So it's more intimate, more if the kids use it, it's more effective. So is it the 3rd year you've done it now?
Yes. So we're in our 3rd year and we just accepted our 4th cohort.
And I was part of the interview process for that.
Yeah.
Any success stories in the people that you've helped that you'd like to maybe talk about?
Sure. We've had some really great folks come through. Of course, you know, from our very first cohort, Jerry Palacios, who's also on the board right now.
Shout out to Jerry.
Shout out Jerry. You know, is doing great working at NetSuite. Has been doing so for the past, I guess, 3 years now since he's graduated. Feels like it passed by really fast. He really sought the expertise from one of our other board members, Chance Vaughn,
Okay.
who's not on the board anymore, but I know Chance was a really integral mentor to Jerry.
Okay. I can see
When
that.
Jerry first started in Ivory Bridges, he had a lot of ideas about what he wanted to do. Chance really helped him focus his ideas, get a good glimpse at his strengths, and see that sales could be a really good and frankly, like great ROI pathway for him.
Right.
And so, Jerry is, of course, one alum that we're always very proud of.
Right. Yeah.
Also, from our second cohort, we have someone named Cyril. And Cyril is a entrepreneur that has started his own artificial intelligence company.
Wow.
He actually was accepted to the very prestigious Y Combinator program, which has
Okay.
about a 1 to 2% acceptance rate. This is a group that helps budding entrepreneurs, folks that have just started their own companies. They invest a good amount of money into their companies and basically provide mentorship
Okay.
for these entrepreneurs. And so Cyril has done great things with his company. And I'm excited to also serve as an advisor to that company as well.
So, as you are the third or fourth year of Ivory Bridges, how do you get funding and where do you want it to go?
Yeah. So our funding comes in large part from the San Diego Foundation,
Okay.
but then also as real estate entrepreneurs, Dave and I also contribute a good amount to private funding as well.
Nice.
And then what we've also been able to do is whenever we do real estate transactions, we also ask folks that have been involved in the deal to contribute
Nice.
to the foundation. And what I found is that folks are actually really, really good about it, right?
Right.
I think folks that you work well with, that you have a good rapport with, will contribute to the foundation.
Well, they probably want you to keep working with them too. So if you say no, you might feel a little pressure.
100%. But if you're listening to this podcast, just know that is not why I choose to work with you. I work with you because you're great, wholesome people that do great work.
Checks in the mail. Well, do you have any announcements or anything that you want to talk about up and coming that people may not know or may want to know?
Sure. So you and I just chatted about this a little bit before.
Mhm.
I just started a website.
Nice.
By the way, $200 off of Fiverr, which is an app. I think when I first thought about doing a website, I had a coach, Darren K. Roberts, shout out to you, who was really helping me work through what I wanted to do, think through myself more as an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked through a lot of ideas together. One of the things that he wanted me to do, and he encouraged me to do, was start a website.
Okay.
Have you heard of imposter syndrome?
Yep.
Okay. So I have a lot of that, right?
Really?
And I've had a lot of that just in my life where I've never felt like I'm in the right place or I'm ready to do X, Y, and Z.
Okay.
Right? And so the website thing is something that was suggested to me a very long time ago, has been suggested to me throughout time. Darren suggested it to me. And to be honest, it wasn't until I had, for the very first time in my life, I have a 1 month job transition where I'm unemployed right now.
Have the time.
I have the time to actually think through it and reflect on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I basically went on Fiverr. I hired a web developer to do it, provided him with the content, and it's come out really, really nicely.
I was impressed.
Thank you. So if you check out charlesluphd.com, you can take a little bit. You can take a look at some of the things that I get into, some of the services that I offer. And I talk about everything from publishing some of the articles that I've written, some of the things that I've done on media, to consulting, to some of the things that we do with real estate, and of course, from a philanthropic angle, we also talk about Ivory Bridges and some of the other great nonprofits I'm involved with.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's funny. Everyone kind of has the imposter syndrome in a way, but when you look at that other person, you think like, man, they figured it out. They know what they want to do, but they're all trying to figure it out just like you are.
100%. I mean,
Right.
whenever to be honest, even being on the show, right?
Right.
Like I was looking at like your previous guests and I'm like, yo, I don't stack up to them.
Come
on. Like you have some like great folks on the show, and it's interesting, right? Just talking with you about it, because now that we're talking through it, I wonder how many of them have ever had imposter syndrome, or even still have imposter syndrome to this day, right? Like, I don't know. But I know that it's something that folks definitely struggle with, and I am a living testament of that.
I feel like you just no matter how easy you make it look, you still want it to be better just because you're that type of person. I think we all are that way, you know.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, I think that's our time. Well, first, I want to thank you personally for coming on the show. I wasn't not asking you to be on for any other reason, and I just wanted to make sure we got it right. And with the reboot of the show now, I think it's the perfect time, and thank God that you have some time off work to be on the show. So thank you so much for being my friend. Thank you so much for being on the show. And in the words of Dr. Dre, just chill for the next episode.
Love it. Appreciate it, brother.
Appreciate you, brother. Thank you.
You.